Chapter 1. The Daughter Who Never Said No. The day my own family took me to court, they thought I would beg, explain, or break down. Instead, I stayed silent. I was the daughter who paid the mortgage, covered the hospital bills, and kept saying yes for over a decade, until the day they changed the garage code, locked me out, and sent me a legal notice. In that courtroom, they called me controlling, said I had no family of my own, said I did not understand sacrifice. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I handed the judge one folder and watched the room go quiet. My name is Eleanor, and this is the story of how silence became my strongest proof. I learned early that being reliable made people comfortable asking for more. Not politely asking, not carefully asking, just assuming I would say yes because I always had. For more than 13 years, I was the one my family leaned on, quietly, consistently, without ceremony. I did not announce sacrifices, I absorbed them. That was how love worked in my mind back then. In 2011, my father, Paul Cole, began to slow down. He was 68 and proud of having never needed help, which made his gradual decline harder for him to accept and easier for everyone else to ignore. My mother, Linda, framed it as temporary, a rough season, nothing to worry about. My younger brother, Ryan, was still finding his path, which was the phrase everyone used to excuse his lack of direction. I was 36, recently promoted, steady, unmarried, living in a small townhouse outside Dayton, Ohio. I had the job that came with health insurance and a predictable paycheck, which quietly made me the safest option. At first, it was small, a hospital bill that needed to be paid quickly, a repair on the roof before winter, a few mortgage payments when my parents felt stretched. Each request came wrapped in reassurance that it was just this once. I wrote checks at my kitchen counter late at night, still in work clothes, convincing myself this was what family did. I never felt forced, I felt needed, which at the time felt like the same thing as being valued. Over the years, the requests became routine. I transferred money during lunch breaks. I signed forms without reading every line because I trusted the people handing them to me. When my father could no longer keep track of paperwork, I stepped in. When my mother said the bank paperwork was confusing, I handled it. When Ryan was too busy to attend meetings, I went in his place. I did not notice how rarely anyone asked if I was tired. I worked as a contracts and compliance manager for a regional shipping company, Midwest Transit Solutions, a job that trained me to document everything. I kept copies because that was who I was at work, not because I suspected anything. Old habits follow you home without explanation. I saved emails, I scanned statements, I filed documents into neat folders labeled by year. It never occurred to me that one day those habits would matter outside my office. There were moments when the imbalance flickered into view. Ryan borrowed money for a business idea that never launched. My parents waved it off as encouragement. When I hesitated before sending another payment, my mother reminded me gently that I had always been the strong one. I took that as a compliment and sent the money anyway. Some nights I drove to my parents' house after work to help with repairs or paperwork. I remember standing in their kitchen at nearly midnight, signing a check for my father's medical copay while my mother brewed tea she never drank. She thanked me with a tired smile, told me she did not know what they would do without me. I went home feeling useful and strangely hollow. By 2017, my contributions covered more than half of the household expenses: mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, repairs. It was never formalized, it did not need to be. Everyone knew. Or so I thought. In early 2018, my mother called and asked if I could meet her to sign some papers. She said it was an estate update, just housekeeping, something the bank recommended now that my father was older. Her voice was calm, affectionate, reassuring. She told me it would make things easier later. That word later floated between us without shape. We met at a small office near downtown Dayton. The notary, a man named Victor Hale, greeted us kindly and spread the documents across the desk. There were many pages. I scanned the first few out of habit, looking for obvious red flags. Everything looked standard: names, addresses, dates. Victor explained the process patiently. My mother nodded along, repeating that this was just in case. I signed where I was told. I did not feel rushed. I did not feel suspicious. I trusted the room I was in and the people I was with. When Victor offered copies, I accepted without hesitation and placed them into my bag. That was reflex, not foresight. As we left, my mother squeezed my hand and told me she was proud of me, that she knew she could always count on me. The words landed warmly and sealed whatever faint unease had tried to surface. I drove home telling myself that responsible people planned ahead, and that was all this was. Life continued. I kept paying, I kept managing, I kept saying yes. There were late-night phone calls asking for quick transfers. There were emails asking me to review bank statements. There were weekends spent fixing things Ryan did not have time for. Each time I told myself that families took turns carrying weight, even when the turn lasted years. I noticed changes gradually. Conversations about finances happened without me. Decisions were presented as already made. When I asked questions, the answers were vague. My mother said not to worry. Ryan said everything was handled. My father said little at all. I pushed the discomfort aside because acknowledging it felt disloyal, because I believed that love meant endurance, because I had built my identity around being the dependable one and didn't know who I would be if I stopped. One evening, after another routine transfer, I sat alone in my car outside my townhouse and stared at the steering wheel longer than necessary. The thought crossed my mind that something felt uneven, but I dismissed it as stress. Work had been demanding, everyone was tired, families went through phases. I carried the signed estate papers inside and filed them away with the rest of my documents. I did not reread them. I trusted that what I had signed matched what I had been told. Trust felt simpler than doubt. If there was a moment when things could have shifted, when I might have paused and asked harder questions, I don't remember it clearly. What I remember instead is how easy it was to believe that the people who raised me would never place me in harm's way. That belief followed me into the next year, into the next payment, into the next favor. It settled quietly into the background of my life, unchallenged, unquestioned. I left the notary office that day with a thin stack of paper in my bag and the familiar sense of having done the right thing. The faint unease that brushed past me as I walked to my car faded by the time I reached the highway. I told myself that families looked out for each other and that whatever I gave would eventually find its way back in some form. At the time, that felt like certainty. What I did not know yet was how fragile certainty can be when it rests entirely on trust. Chapter 2. When Family Language Turned Legal. By 2019, I could feel the air change in our family, like a house that looks the same from the street but smells different the moment you step inside. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. There was no shouting match, no slammed doors, no one telling me outright that I was no longer welcome, and decisions I had helped fund for years. It was subtler than that, which somehow made it worse. I kept paying the mortgage on my parents' home the same way I always had. Automatic transfer on the first of the month, plus whatever extra came up. A furnace tune-up, a medical copay, a new set of tires for my father's old sedan. My mother would call with that soft voice that always made me feel like I was doing the right thing. "We are so grateful," she would say. "You have no idea how much this helps." I would answer the way I always did. "It is fine, Mom. Just tell me what you need." But when I asked questions, real questions, the answers came back hazy, like someone had smeared petroleum jelly over the truth. "We already talked about it," my brother Ryan would say. "Talked about it? Who?" I would ask. "Just us," he would reply. "It is handled." Handled became the new family word. It is handled. We took care of it. Everything is arranged. Those phrases slid into conversations where my name used to be. There used to be Sunday lunches with a notebook on the table, my mother listing bills, my father tapping the pen with that serious look. Ryan scrolling on his phone while I organized the numbers. Then the lunches stopped. My father felt tired, my mother said. Ryan was busy, she said. Life got complicated, she said. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that my absence from those conversations meant they were finally taking weight off my shoulders. But my bank account told a different story. The money still left. The requests still came. Only the respect, the inclusion, the basic courtesy of being informed started fading. In late summer of 2020, I stopped by my parents' house on my way home from work. It had been a long day, the kind that makes your eyes feel gritty, your shoulders stiff, your patience thin. I had picked up groceries and a bag of cat litter for my mother because she mentioned her knee was acting up. I pulled into the driveway, punched in the garage code out of muscle memory, and watched the keypad blink red. I tried again. Red. For a second, I thought my fingers were wrong, like my brain had slipped a gear. I tried a third time. Red. The garage door stayed shut, silent and stubborn, like it had never known me. I stood there with two bags cutting into my hands, staring at a code I had used for years. My stomach tightened, a clean, sharp twist. I called my mother. She did not answer. I called my father, straight to voicemail. I texted Ryan just a simple question, "Did you guys change the garage code?" A few minutes later, the front door opened and Ryan stepped out onto the porch like he belonged there. He was in sweatpants, barefoot, holding a mug. Behind him, through the open doorway, I could see a stack of cardboard boxes and a pair of men's shoes that were not my father's. "Hey," he said, "what are you doing here?" I lifted the grocery bag slightly, like proof I wasn't hallucinating. "I'm dropping this off. The garage code is not working." Ryan took a slow sip of coffee. "Oh yeah, we changed it." "We," I repeated. He shrugged. "It was time. Too many people knew the old one." "What people?" I asked, feeling my voice tighten. He let his eyes slide past me, as if looking for an easier conversation somewhere over my shoulder. "It's not a big deal. Mom asked me to handle it." Handle it. That word again. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Why was I not told? Ryan sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "Because you don't need it." My hands were trembling. I tried to keep my tone calm, but I could feel heat climbing up my neck. "Are you living here now?" Ryan smiled, a small smile that made my skin crawl. "Just temporarily. Dad needs help. Mom wants someone around. It makes sense." "It makes sense," I repeated, and the words tasted metallic. From inside the house, my mother called his name. Ryan turned and answered her, his voice light, affectionate, like nothing was wrong. Then he looked back at me and said, "You can just leave the bags on the porch." I stood there, stunned by how quickly I had been reduced to a delivery service. I walked up the steps and set the groceries down carefully. My mother appeared in the doorway, but she did not step outside. She smiled, but it was the smile she used when she wanted something to stay calm. "Hi, honey," she said. "You didn't have to do all that." I swallowed hard. "Mom, why did you change the garage code without telling me?" Her eyes flicked to Ryan, then back to me. "It's nothing personal. Ryan just thought it was safer." "Safer from who?" I asked. He let his eyes slide past me, as if looking for an easier conversation somewhere over my shoulder. "It's not a big deal. Mom asked me to handle it." Handle it. That word again. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Why was I not told? Ryan sighed, like I was inconveniencing him. "Because you don't need it." My hands were trembling. I tried to keep my tone calm, but I could feel heat climbing up my neck. "Are you living here now?" Ryan smiled, a small smile that made my skin crawl. "Just temporarily. Dad needs help. Mom wants someone around. It makes sense." "It makes sense," I repeated, and the words tasted metallic. From inside the house, my mother called his name. Ryan turned and answered her, his voice light, affectionate, like nothing was wrong. Then he looked back at me and said, "You can just leave the bags on the porch." I stood there, stunned by how quickly I had been reduced to a delivery service. I walked up the steps and set the groceries down carefully. My mother appeared in the doorway, but she did not step outside. She smiled, but it was the smile she used when she wanted something to stay calm. "Hi, honey," she said. "You didn't have to do all that." I swallowed hard. "Mom, why did you change the garage code without telling me?" Her eyes flicked to Ryan, then back to me. "It's nothing personal. Ryan just thought it was safer." "Safer from who?" I asked. He let his eyes slide past me, as if looking for an easier conversation somewhere over my shoulder. "It's not a big deal. Mom asked me to handle it." Handle it. That word again. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Why was I not told? Ryan sighed, like I was inconveniencing him. "Because you don't need it." My hands were trembling. I tried to keep my tone calm, but I could feel heat climbing up my neck. "Are you living here now?" Ryan smiled, a small smile that made my skin crawl. "Just temporarily. Dad needs help. Mom wants someone around. It makes sense." "It makes sense," I repeated, and the words tasted metallic. From inside the house, my mother called his name. Ryan turned and answered her, his voice light, affectionate, like nothing was wrong. Then he looked back at me and said, "You can just leave the bags on the porch." I stood there, stunned by how quickly I had been reduced to a delivery service. I walked up the steps and set the groceries down carefully. My mother appeared in the doorway, but she did not step outside. She smiled, but it was the smile she used when she wanted something to stay calm. "Hi, honey," she said. "You didn't have to do all that." I swallowed hard. "Mom, why did you change the garage code without telling me?" Her eyes flicked to Ryan, then back to me. "It's nothing personal. Ryan just thought it was safer." "Safer from who?" I asked. He let his eyes slide past me, as if looking for an easier conversation somewhere over my shoulder. "It's not a big deal. Mom asked me to handle it." Handle it. That word again. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Why was I not told? Ryan sighed, like I was inconveniencing him. "Because you don't need it." My hands were trembling. I tried to keep my tone calm, but I could feel heat climbing up my neck. "Are you living here now?" Ryan smiled, a small smile that made my skin crawl. "Just temporarily. Dad needs help. Mom wants someone around. It makes sense." "It makes sense," I repeated, and the words tasted metallic. From inside the house, my mother called his name. Ryan turned and answered her, his voice light, affectionate, like nothing was wrong. Then he looked back at me and said, "You can just leave the bags on the porch." I stood there, stunned by how quickly I had been reduced to a delivery service. I walked up the steps and set the groceries down carefully. My mother appeared in the doorway, but she did not step outside. She smiled, but it was the smile she used when she wanted something to stay calm. "Hi, honey," she said. "You didn't have to do all that." I swallowed hard. "Mom, why did you change the garage code without telling me?" Her eyes flicked to Ryan, then back to me. "It's nothing personal. Ryan just thought it was safer." "Safer from who?" I asked. He let his eyes slide past me, as if looking for an easier conversation somewhere over my shoulder. "It's not a big deal. Mom asked me to handle it." Handle it. That word again. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Why was I not told? Ryan sighed, like I was inconveniencing him. "Because you don't need it." My hands were trembling. I tried to keep my tone calm, but I could feel heat climbing up my neck. "Are you living here now?" Ryan smiled, a small smile that made my skin crawl. "Just temporarily. Dad needs help. Mom wants someone around. It makes sense." "It makes sense," I repeated, and the words tasted metallic. From inside the house, my mother called his name. Ryan turned and answered her, his voice light, affectionate, like nothing was wrong. Then he looked back at me and said, "You can just leave the bags on the porch." I stood there, stunned by how quickly I had been reduced to a delivery service. I walked up the steps and set the groceries down carefully. My mother appeared in the doorway, but she did not step outside. She smiled, but it was the smile she used when she wanted something to stay calm. "Hi, honey," she said. "You did not have to do all that." I swallowed hard. "Mom, why did you change the garage code without telling me?" Her eyes flicked to Ryan, then back at me. "It is nothing personal. Ryan just thought it was safer." "Safer from who?" I asked. She made a soft, dismissive sound. "You know, just in general. We are older. Things happen." I could not stop myself. I pay for this house. I have helped keep this place afloat for years. I should not have to stand in the driveway like a stranger. My mother pressed her lips together. "Eleanor, please, do not make this a thing." A thing? As if my place in the family was a minor inconvenience? I looked at my father. He was sitting in his recliner behind her, eyes on the television, volume low. He did not look at me. He did not say my name. He did not even pretend to notice the tension. His silence landed harder than any argument. I left without raising my voice. I walked back to my car, hands empty now, feeling ridiculous and small. I sat behind the wheel and stared at the porch where my groceries sat like an offering. Ryan went back inside and closed the door. My phone buzzed a few hours later while I was still sitting at my kitchen table, trying to convince myself I had overreacted. It was an email. The subject line was formal and cold, "Notice regarding property interest and loan documents." The sender was a law office in Montgomery County, a name I did not recognize. I opened it and felt my breath catch. It referenced the refinance on my parents' home, the one I had helped arrange when interest rates dropped. It listed names tied to ownership and authority: my father's name, my mother's name, Ryan's name. My name appeared once, buried in a paragraph that described my contributions as voluntary support, not an interest. I read that line 3 times, not because it was complicated, but because my brain refused to accept it. I called my mother immediately. She declined the call. I called again, declined. I texted her, "Did you know about this email?" Minutes passed. Then a reply arrived, short enough to feel like a slap. "Do not come over. Let the attorney handle communication. We need peace right now." Peace, the word she used when she wanted control. I sat there with my phone in my hand, the screen glowing, my pulse loud in my ears. My parents were alive. My brother was in their house. And yet I was being instructed to speak through attorneys, as if I had become a problem to be managed instead of a daughter. That night I drove back to their street and parked across from the house, not to confront anyone, just to see it. Lights were on in the living room. A shadow moved past the window. Somewhere inside, my family was eating dinner, making plans I would not hear. I stayed there longer than I meant to, watching a place that no longer felt like mine. The silence in my car was heavy, broken only by the ticking sound of the engine cooling. For the first time, it occurred to me that whatever had shifted was not temporary, it was intentional. It had been done quietly, step by step, while I was busy being helpful. When I finally drove away, I did not cry. I felt something harder and colder settle in my chest, a realization that the language I had spoken all my life, loyalty, sacrifice, family, no longer applied in the same way. Something else had replaced it, something formal and distant, written in emails and notices and locked doors. I pulled into my driveway and sat there in the dark, hands resting on the steering wheel, understanding that whatever came next would not be solved by another transfer or another apology. The house behind me faded into the rearview mirror, and with it the last illusion that my place there was guaranteed. Chapter 3. Silence was how I survived. Clarity came quietly, without relief, without mercy. It settled in my chest like a weight I could finally name. The night I sat in my driveway after staring at my parents' house from across the street, I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I could not fix this by being generous. I could not soften it by being kind. Whatever was happening had already moved beyond family language, and I had been the last one to notice. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I answered emails, reviewed contracts, joined meetings where people argued over wording that mattered more than feelings. That part of my life made sense. Rules existed, paper trails existed, accountability existed. It was strange how calm I felt there compared to the chaos I carried everywhere else. During lunch, I printed the email from the law office and read it again, slower this time. The phrasing was precise, almost polite. It described my financial contributions as voluntary support, not equity, not ownership, voluntary, as if 13 years of payments had been a hobby I suddenly abandoned. I stared at that word until it lost meaning. I tried calling my mother again that afternoon, not because I expected a different outcome, but because part of me still needed to hear her voice. The call went unanswered. I did not leave a message. I did not try my father. I already knew what silence sounded like. Instead, I texted my brother. "Did you know they contacted a lawyer?" He replied an hour later. "Yes, it is just to make things clean." Clean, another word that sounded harmless until you looked at what it erased. That evening, I made an appointment with an attorney. His name was Miles Navarro. His office sat above a coffee shop in downtown Dayton, the kind of place with narrow stairs and framed diplomas on beige walls. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive. He asked me to sit and tell him everything from the beginning. I talked for nearly an hour about the payments, the garage code, the email, my father's silence, my mother's message telling me to stay away. Miles listened without interrupting, taking notes, his expression neutral. When I finished, he set his pen down. "You are not going to resolve this emotionally," he said. "They have already decided to reframe the story. If you react, you confirm the version they need." I swallowed. "So what do I do?" "You get quiet," he said, "and you get precise." He explained that estate and trust disputes were rarely about one document. They were about patterns, timelines, intent. He asked what records I had. "I keep everything," I said. "It's part of my job." His eyes lifted slightly. "Good. Then you already have an advantage. We start with the refinance." That night, I opened the file cabinet in my spare room. The drawers slid out with a sound that felt louder than it should have. Inside were folders I had labeled by year, a habit I never questioned. I laid them across my dining table and worked until midnight, scanning, sorting, stacking. The refinance documents from 2018 sat heavier in my hands than the others. I remembered that day clearly, my mother's calm voice, the notary explaining each step, the feeling that I was being helpful, responsible, trusted. I called the notary listed on the documents the next morning. His name was Victor Hale. "Victor Hale speaking?" "Hi, this is Eleanor Cole. We met a few years ago for estate paperwork with my parents." There was a pause. "Yes," he said slowly, "I remember. I need a copy of the notary log from that day." Another pause. "Is there a dispute involved?" "Yes," I said. "I will need a formal request from your attorney," he replied, "but I can provide it." His voice carried something I could not quite name. Hesitation. Maybe regret. Miles referred me to a forensic accountant named Priya Desai. We met in her office in Kettering, a quiet space filled with binders and clean surfaces. She shook my hand and got straight to work. "Tell me what you think happened," she said. "I think they made sure I kept paying while quietly removing me from control." She nodded once. "Then we follow the money." For weeks, we did exactly that. Priya taught me how to read statements differently, how to look for changes that were easy to miss, routing numbers, payment descriptions, dates that shifted just enough to matter. I learned to see how small decisions created large outcomes. One afternoon, she called me. "I found something unusual." My heart started racing. "What is it?" "Your escrow payments," she said. "They were redirected after the refinance, not to the lender, not to the servicer, to a third-party processor connected to your brother." I closed my eyes. "That should not be possible." "It should not," she agreed, "but it is documented." That night, I reread the refinance packet page by page. Near the back, between standard disclosures, I found a document I didn't remember reading. It was titled Quitclaim Addendum. The language was dry, almost kind. It referenced contingency planning, authority delegation, capacity concerns. Buried inside was the shift. Control moved away from me. Authority concentrated with Ryan if my father was deemed unable to manage his affairs. My hands shook as I held the page. I tried to remember signing it. I couldn't, which meant either I had missed it or it had been placed where it would not draw attention. I called Miles immediately. "I found the addendum," I said. He was silent for a moment. "That's the mechanism," he said. "That's how they changed the board without telling the player." A week later, the notary log arrived. The timestamps were subtle, but wrong enough to suggest manipulation. The order of signatures did not align with standard procedure. Pages acknowledged separately that should have been grouped. It wasn't blatant fraud. It was careful. It became clear then that this was not a single betrayal. It was a sequence, a plan executed quietly, patiently, using my trust as leverage. One evening, Priya sat across from me at my dining table, papers spread out between us. "You are handling this well," she said. "I don't feel strong," I replied. "Strength is not how it feels, it's how it holds." When everything was assembled, I placed the quitclaim addendum at the front, followed by escrow statements, email timestamps, and the notary log. I created a simple cover sheet. No commentary, no emotion, just dates and facts. I closed the folder and rested my hand on it. In that moment, I understood something clearly. I would not win by telling them how much they hurt me. I would win by showing exactly what they did. And for the first time since October, that felt like enough. The courthouse hallway was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in tone. People spoke in lowered voices, as if sound itself might interfere with the seriousness of the place. I arrived early and sat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, the folder resting on my lap. I had rehearsed nothing. There was nothing left to explain. Everything I needed to say was already printed, dated, and tapped. When the doors opened, the bailiff called our case with a flat voice that stripped our last name of any intimacy. Inside, the room was smaller than it looked on television. No audience, no drama. Just rows of benches, 2 tables, and the raised bench where Judge Ellen Roth would soon sit. My parents were already there with Ryan. They looked composed, almost calm. My mother held her purse tightly, as if it were a shield. My father stared straight ahead. Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw set. None of them acknowledged me when I took my seat. Judge Roth entered, and we stood. She was deliberate in her movements, unhurried, with the kind of presence that did not need volume. She glanced at the case file, then at each table, then nodded for us to sit. The plaintiff's attorney stood first. He adjusted his jacket and smiled politely at the judge. "Your Honor, this case is about boundaries," he began. "It is about an adult daughter who confused generosity with entitlement." I kept my eyes on the table in front of me. "Miss Cole involved herself financially in her parents' affairs, by choice," he continued. "Over time, that involvement became control." He gestured lightly toward me. "She managed payments, she inserted herself into decisions, she positioned herself as indispensable." I felt the familiar sting of being described without being known. "My clients sought to restore balance," he said. "They updated their estate planning to reflect their true intentions. That is not betrayal. That is prudence." He paused, then added the line that made my chest tighten. "Miss Cole does not have a family of her own. She does not understand the sacrifices required to protect one." The words hung in the air. I waited for my mother to speak. I waited for my father to object. Neither did. Judge Roth made a small note, her face unreadable. When the plaintiff's attorney finished, she turned to Miles Navarro. "Mr. Navarro." Miles stood. "Your Honor, we will not be offering character arguments today," he said. "We will be offering documentation." He nodded to me. "Miss Cole." I stood and walked to the front with the folder in my hands. The room felt quiet, but not hostile, just attentive. "I am not here to argue intent," I said. I am here to submit evidence. I handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The first document was the quitclaim addendum. Judge Roth read it carefully. She did not skim, she did not rush. After a moment, she looked up. "This addendum reassigns decision-making authority," she said. "Miss Cole, were you informed this would occur?" "No, Your Honor," I replied. "I was told the paperwork was an estate update for emergencies." She turned to the plaintiff's attorney. "Was Miss Cole advised of this reassignment?" "It was signed voluntarily," he said. Judge Roth did not respond. She continued reading. Next, she reviewed the escrow statements. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "These payments," she said, "they were redirected following the refinance." She looked at Miles. "Are these funds associated with the lender?" "No, Your Honor," Miles said. "They were routed to a third-party processor connected to the plaintiff's son." A quiet shift moved through the room. Judge Roth looked at the plaintiff's attorney. "Can you explain the purpose of this redirection?" "It was an administrative matter," he said. "Administrative matters typically benefit the lender, not an individual." Judge Roth set the papers aside and moved to the email timestamps. "These messages indicate Miss Cole was traveling during the signing period." "That is correct. She was on assignment in Indiana." Judge Roth turned to me. "Miss Cole, did you sign the quitclaim addendum remotely?" "No, Your Honor," I said. She looked back down. "And yet the notary log indicates acknowledgement on the same date as the primary signing." She picked up the notary log next. The room went very still. Judge Roth compared pages, her finger tracing lines. She paused, then looked up. "This acknowledgement order here is irregular," she said. "Can you explain this discrepancy?" The plaintiff's attorney hesitated. "I would need to speak with the notary." Judge Roth nodded once. "That may be necessary." For the first time, Ryan shifted in his chair. My mother clasped her hands together more tightly. My father stared straight ahead. Judge Roth set her pen down. "This court does not evaluate family loyalty," she said. "It evaluates actions supported by documentation." She looked directly at the plaintiffs. "At present, the documentation raises material questions." She tapped the folder lightly. "I am ordering a recess to review these materials in detail." The gavel struck once. As the room began to move again, voices rose slightly, careful and controlled. Miles leaned toward me. "You did exactly what you needed to do," he said quietly. I nodded. Across the aisle, my parents stood together. My mother did not look at me. My father spoke softly to their attorney. Ryan stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. I remained seated for a moment longer, hands folded, breathing slow. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel relieved. I felt settled. The folder was no longer in my hands. The story was no longer mine to tell. It sat on the judge's bench now, stripped of emotion, waiting to be weighed. When I finally stood to leave the courtroom during the recess, I understood something clearly. I had not come there to be believed. I had come there to be precise. And in that room, precision carried more weight than anything I could have said out loud. Chapter 5. What the Truth Cost Me. Something in me finally loosened, not because I felt victorious, but because I no longer had to keep pretending this could be repaired. The ruling arrived 2 weeks later through the court portal, quiet and procedural, the way endings usually are when they matter most. I was alone at my kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling beside my laptop. I did not rush. I read every word slowly, the same way I had learned to read contracts at work, line by line, without hoping for what I wanted, only for what was true. The court denied my family's claims in full. The judge cited inconsistencies in the refinance documentation, improper redirection of escrow payments, and material omissions during execution of the quitclaim addendum. Authority transferred under that addendum was deemed invalid pending further civil review. Certain transactions were flagged for additional examination. The language was clean, impersonal, final. I sat back in my chair and waited for something dramatic to happen inside me. Relief, anger, joy. None of it came. What I felt instead was a deep stillness, like a long-held breath finally released, leaving behind a quiet I did not know how to fill. Miles called later that afternoon. "It went the way it needed to," he said. "Yes," I replied. My voice sounded steady, almost unfamiliar. "You handled it well," he added. "You did not give them anything extra to work with." After we hung up, I stayed where I was. The room looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Same light through the window, same stack of mail by the door. The difference was internal. The argument was over. The facts had been spoken for me. There was no call from my parents, no message asking if we could talk. Ryan did not reach out. Silence, it turned out, was their chosen response as well. But this time, it did not feel like abandonment. It felt like confirmation. News traveled in indirect ways. A former colleague of Ryan's mentioned that his brokerage had placed him under review. Deals slowed, clients asked questions. Nothing dramatic, no scandal, just the quiet erosion of trust, the kind of consequence that arrives without spectacle and stays. I did not take pleasure in it. I did not need to. I understood then that karma does not always punish loudly. Sometimes it simply removes the shortcuts people relied on and lets the world respond naturally. My final visit to the courthouse was brief. A signature, a stamped acknowledgement. I walked the same halls, passed the same security desk, heard the same echo of footsteps. But my shoulders were no longer tense. I was not bracing for anything. As I waited near the clerk's window, someone spoke my name softly behind me. "Eleanor." I turned to see Victor Hale, the notary. He looked smaller somehow, less certain than I remembered him. "I wanted to say something, if you have a moment." I nodded. I followed procedure that day, but I did not ask enough questions. I should have paid closer attention. I am sorry I did not see it sooner. His apology was not dramatic. It did not undo anything, but it mattered. It acknowledged that what happened was not just unfortunate, but wrong. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you saying that." He nodded once and walked away again, leaving me alone again. For the first time, that did not feel heavy. When I stepped outside the courthouse, the sun was bright, almost jarringly normal. Cars passed, people laughed on the sidewalk. Life continued, indifferent to my internal shift. I walked down the steps alone, keys in hand, and realized no one was waiting for me. That was the part that hurt the most, and also the part that freed me. Driving home, I passed the exit that led to my parents' street. For years, I would have slowed automatically. This time, I did not. I stayed in my lane and kept going, surprised by how natural it felt. In the weeks that followed, I dismantled the practical remnants of my old role. I canceled automatic transfers, I closed shared accounts, I boxed up the folders that had consumed my dining table for months and slid them onto a shelf I no longer needed to visit. Each small action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had lent out without terms. I slept better. Not perfectly. Some nights the memories surfaced anyway. My mother's voice, my father's silence, the locked garage door. But the weight of responsibility had lifted. I was no longer managing other people's lives at the expense of my own. Friends reached out in ways they had not before. Coworkers invited me to lunch. Someone I barely knew sent a message saying they admired how I handled things. I realized then how visible quiet strength can be once you stop hiding it. I thought often about how easily I had confused endurance with love, how I believed being useful was the same as being valued, how I had stayed silent not to protect myself, but to keep everyone else comfortable. I did not stop believing in family. I stopped believing that family automatically meant safety. I learned that trust without boundaries is not loyalty, it's exposure. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, if you've been the reliable one, the fixer, the person who absorbs without complaint, I want you to hear this. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's the only way to gather the truth without giving away your power. You do not have to shout to be heard. You do not have to destroy relationships to protect yourself. And you don't owe endless sacrifice to anyone who treats your presence as a resource instead of a relationship. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived something similar, or are standing at the beginning of it now, stay here. There are more stories like this, stories about boundaries, proof, and rebuilding yourself when the people you trusted most stepped aside. For me, that was the real resolution, not what I gained, but what I finally stopped losing.